We are all the way up to 3-8, functions, day one, page 97 in your packets. But here's your pre-lesson. There's quite a bit of language that's coming at you today. The math, trust me, is extremely easy as far as like calculations and comparing them to story problems. Today's challenge is going to be, what does all this symbolism mean? So that's what I'm going to attempt to explain for you right now. So you've got this equation. Now, I think if I asked you, what is this? You would say that's an equation. Now, what math is going to start doing is it's going to start calling these things functions. Don't panic, they're still equations. And yes, that's still the equation of a line. That is in y equals mx plus b form. So don't lose sight of that. We're just adding one piece of terminology today, and that is, it's also considered a function. Now, if you really want me to kind of dummy this down, think about yourself going to one of those weird machines, not a pop machine, but a pop machine would work. But I'm thinking of like The Office. If you haven't seen The Office, I apologize, but they got this infamous little snack machine. You put a couple quarters in there and you hit a button, and then you might get some Cheetos, you might get an apple. And that's kind of what we're talking about. You put something in and you hit a button and you get something out. Now, what am I talking about? Well, this right here is a list of my x's. Now, what you also need to get used to is thinking of this new word. This is my domain. Domain is the list of x's that you're going to plug into the equation / function. You see, you've been doing this for a long time, so it's just another new word. So look at another way I can say it is d equals, and then they use these little notations right here, set notations. It's just, and you normally start smallest to biggest, so it's kind of the reverse of this. -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. This just means, hey, we're going to plug all these things one at a time. We're going to figure out what our R is. Now, what's R? R stands for our range. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go ahead and plug this one in. 2 times 2 is 4. So that's like the quarter I put in. I put the 2 in. 2 times 2 is 4, and y equals 4. So this is like the bag of Cheetos. Put the 1 in. 2 times 1 is 2. That's my apple. Put the 0 in. That's my pack of gum. -1 gives me -2. Put a -2 in there, I get -4. Now, don't lose sight of this. These are coordinate points. So that's the same thing as finding 2, 4. That's the same thing as finding 1, 2. And there's just, 5 coordinate points. If we plotted them, that would represent that line. But today is more of what's domain, what's range. Well, domain is your list of x's, so what do you suppose the range is? That's your list of y's, from smallest to largest. So when you see this notation, don't panic. It's pretty simple. Okay, now, I didn't talk about this, but Algebra 2 is now going to start introducing you to this language. They're going to start writing this like this. And you might think to yourself, well, why don't they just keep it simple? Well, again, what is Algebra 2? Algebra 2 is getting you ready for pre-calculus. What's pre-calculus? Well, that's getting you ready for calculus. So now we're starting to introduce to you some different language. It's just like hola and hello. So, if your Spanish teacher was teaching you how to say hello on day one, they'd say hola, and then you would repeat it, hola. And I don't think anyone in the history of Spanish class has ever went, I don't like that. Why'd they do that? But it seems like that's a heavy tendency in math. But math is a language. Algebra 2 is a language. Pre-calculus is a language. And calculus is a whole different language. And now we're starting to introduce you to that little language. Now this is just the simplest of simple of the language. It's hola. It's a little different, but it means the same thing. What I mean is f of x is the same thing as y. So you're saying every time I see f of x, I can just think of it as a y? 100%. That's my goal for you to see that. Again, I'm just introducing you to language. The math is not that tough. Now, just to help you understand a little bit more before we move forward, I've got this weird looking drawing right here. Some people would think that's a cantaloupe or avocado or maybe a bullet. I don't know, but here's the point I'm trying to make. See this big circle as part of that object? That has an equation. We're not talking about it yet, but it has an equation of a circle. Remember, we've been talking about the equation of a line. The equation that y equals mx plus b. If you graph it, you get a line. There are equations to circles. We haven't talked about it yet. We will. But maybe they would call that big C of x. When you see that little circle, they might call that little c of x in calculus. This dotted line is a parabola, but it's smaller than this one, so maybe they'd go little p of x. And then they would have the big parabola, so they would call that big P of x. And then calculus would allow you to calculate the volume, surface area, a lot of different things. It's pretty fascinating. But that's the reason why there's a need for this sort of symbolism, but they all represent the letter Y. And what's the letter Y represent? Your range. What does the X represent? Your domain. Get used to that language. Now, when we get to a couple sample problems in our packet, you're going to see this symbolism. If you want the simplest truth, this is a fancy, fancy, fancy way of just saying g of x equals x plus 1. And if that's all you need to know, go with it. I did hear one professor back when I was in college actually know what they were talking about, and I kind of heard it, but I kind of didn't, so I'm going to wing it. And I don't think I know this, but it's the function g such that all the x's over the equation x plus 1. I think I just butchered it, but you might never know that. But the bottom line is, every time you see that, it just equals g of x. And what does that equal? Y. So, please understand, it's just some symbolism coming at you, and you got to know what to ignore, but you also have to know what it equals. All right, let's do some of these practice problems in the packet.